When we talk about prosperity, and we use, for example, the gentleman said about economic growth, and the standard indicator for economic growth, which is gross domestic product or gross national product, as the case may be, as an indicator of how these countries are doing, we ignore the special vulnerabilities of regions like the Caribbean, and the fact that regardless of, for example, my own little country being viewed by the international community as a high-income country, that ignores the fact, and therefore, as a high-income country, not being able to access developmental aid. But that ignores the fact that a single storm can wipe out our country, wipe out our infrastructure. Saying to us as 50,000 people, you're high income and therefore you can't access developmental aid, ignores so many vulnerabilities that we experience. And those measures, we feel, have to be recalibrated in order to give us a fair chance and in order to do what I said earlier, to leverage our intellectual capital and become players on the world stage.
If there's one thing we know in a union of 28 countries, it's that there is no single model. There are at least 28 models. And we have to be humble, and we have to make it possible for each one of those countries, member states, to find their own path within a common framework. That is also the attitude we try to project in our international relations, in listening, in dialoguing, in coming with our ideas. And yes, we sometimes have strong ideas, but we're also willing to listen to strong ideas in order to see how we can build partnerships. I try to see, well, along which vectors should we reflect on the future of prosperity? And I came up with one word and three vectors. The word was openness. The vectors was open economies. To open up, to reach out. Closed economies rarely prosper in the long run. We've seen many examples of that. The second one, for want of a better term, is open minds. We have to be ready to try new solutions. We have to try to develop ourselves to move away from old patterns and find new patterns in which to pursue a better life for everyone. And the third one is open and accountable government. Unless you get that, and I think there is a growing demand for that around the world from citizens in many, many countries, unless you have that, governments that close themselves from their people or close their countries from the world, again, very rarely succeed.
This context of openness, open economies. In the Caribbean, what I think that normally translates into is that we then become consumers for major countries that are the producers. And so it ends up being a one-way type of activity. We need decision makers in the major epicenters of power to understand that, going back to your earlier point, it's not just about the EU, it's not just about the United States, that when decisions are made, those decisions have a knock-on effect on those of us who are not at the table when the decision is being made, but nevertheless pay the price and bear the consequences of those decisions.
If you have good governance, you have to ask for efficiency in the public institutions, but also transparency. Mm-hmm. And transparency is related with corruption that you asked to me, Alan. So sometimes there are some decisions taken by public officials for policymakers which are not efficient, but sometimes decisions are not transparent because they are focused in a very small part of the population instead of the benefit for all the population. So that's why all these countries with a lot of natural resources has made many different decisions in a very short-term basis, and sometimes the new governments change the decisions. So the civil society is like expecting what governments decide instead of being part of that decisions.
Prosperity cannot be achieved by nations by themselves, especially nations in the South. I think the Europeans have understood that a long time ago, and I think they are going in that direction. A lot of people have benefited from the integration in Europe. Look at Portugal and the change that happened, Greece, the same thing, Spain, all of those countries in Eastern Europe. I think in African nations, in South American nations, Caribbean nations, I know them, I think integration and also sharing responsibilities and transforming their own kinds of spaces into spaces of creation of wealth is very important.
What you have to do in an economy is to create jobs, to have a good quality of jobs, to have a good dignity jobs, which is a long-term vision for prosperity. It needs a good economy, good institutions, good governance, at the end of the day, good democracy. And good democracy needs and means a lot of civil society participation, good quality of civil society participation, a good quality of people in the private sector demanding good services, but also having the good response to their own obligations, to pay good salaries, to have good conditions for their workers. So this is an integral responsibility for different sectors.
Prosperity is not just about wealth. Ultimately, it's about well-being. It's about the human condition, and it's about human well-being.